The air in the dimly lit reception hall buzzed with the excited chatter of 100 guests, a symphony of clinking glasses and laughter. Fairy lights twinkled, casting a warm, almost magical glow over the scene, reflecting in the polished dance floor. Alan, ever the observer, found himself leaning against a wall, a half-empty glass of champagne in his hand, watching the proceedings with a detached amusement. His wife, Vanessa, was a radiant presence in the center of the dance floor, her emerald green dress shimmering with every movement. She was surrounded by her friends, their faces flushed with the joy of the occasion. It was Sarah's wedding, a day meant to be pure celebration, a milestone marked by tradition and shared happiness. The bride, beaming, stepped back, her hands reaching for the cascading bouquet of roses and lilies. The women around her jostled, a playful scrum of bachelorette dreams. Alan watched his wife's easy smile, the slight tilt of her head as she positioned herself. He'd always found her captivating, even after 10 years of marriage, even amidst the comfortable predictability of their lives. The bouquet arced through the air, a vibrant splash of color against the muted backdrop. It was heading directly towards Vanessa. A collective cheer went up as her hands closed around the stems, a perfect, almost theatrical catch. But then, something shifted. Her smile didn't falter, yet a subtle gleam entered her eyes, a knowing glint that sent an unexpected shiver down Alan's spine. She turned, not immediately to the bride, but her gaze swept across the room, pausing for a fleeting, yet loaded, moment on him. Then, with a voice that cut through the din, a little too loud, a little too sharp, she declared, "Practice makes perfect." The words, meant to be a light-hearted jest, landed with the weight of an accusation, a subtle jab that Alan couldn't quite decipher, but which immediately soured the festive atmosphere for him. The fairy lights suddenly seemed harsher, the laughter more forced, and the comfortable predictability of his life felt, for the first time, like a fragile facade. "Ah, hello there. You've stumbled upon me, have you? Don't mind me, just a quiet observer in this grand, theatrical production called life. My eyes, you see, aren't like yours. They're trained, sharpened by years of watching the predictable, the expected, the utterly mundane unfold with agonizing slowness. I see the cracks in the polished veneer, the subtle shifts in posture that betray a hidden agenda, the microscopic tremors in a voice that signal a carefully constructed lie. It's a gift, they'd call it, if they bothered to notice. Or perhaps a curse, given the sheer volume of, well, this I'm forced to witness on a daily basis. Most people, bless their deluded hearts, are content to skim the surface, to accept the presented narrative at face value. They applaud the actors, believe the speeches, and nod along to the familiar refrains. Me? I'm busy dissecting the script, noticing the misplaced comma, the inconsistent character motivation, the plot hole that screams for attention. It's a lonely existence, this pursuit of unvarnished truth in a world so enamored with its own fabrication. My experiences, a tapestry woven with threads of disillusionment and the occasional, fleeting glimpse of authenticity, have honed my perception into a rather unforgiving instrument. It's why I'm uniquely positioned to see through the smoke and mirrors, to untangle the knots of hypocrisy, and to expose the hollow core of so much that is presented as profound or genuine. The woman's pronouncement, "Practice makes perfect," had been a perfect illustration of it all. Not the literal meaning, mind you, but the subtext, the unspoken current that rippled beneath the surface of her seemingly innocuous remark. It hung in the air, a tiny, sharp shard of glass, instantly shattering the illusion of effortless merriment. Alan, bless his oblivious soul, had felt it too, a prickle of discomfort that he couldn't quite articulate. That's the beauty of it, you see. The unsaid, the implied, often carries more weight than any grand declaration. It's the subtle disdain masked as encouragement, the veiled threat cloaked in a friendly warning, the hollow promise whispered with feigned sincerity. And I, with my perpetually weary gaze, catch every single one. Our connection, once a vibrant tapestry woven with shared laughter and effortless understanding, had devolved into a predictable, almost comforting, rhythm. Mornings began with a silent dance around the kitchen, him brewing his coffee, me preparing my tea, the clatter of mugs and the gentle hum of the refrigerator our constant soundtrack. Dinners were often spent in companionable silence, the television providing a low murmur that filled the void between us. We'd discuss mundane matters, the weather, a neighbor's garden, plans for the weekend, a superficial exchange that kept the wheels of our everyday existence turning. It was a life built on routine, a sturdy foundation of the ordinary, which, in retrospect, was precisely what made the cracks so imperceptible at first. Then came the whispers, the almost imperceptible shifts that I, in my naive hope, chose to dismiss. He started staying out later, citing work emergencies that never seemed to translate into any tangible progress or, for that matter, any actual stress on his part. His phone became an appendage, constantly in his hand, a screen I was no longer privy to. When I'd inquire about his day, his answers grew shorter, punctuated by sighs that felt less like weariness and more like impatience. There were times he'd flinch when I touched him, a fleeting, almost involuntary recoil, which I'd chalk up to him being lost in thought or perhaps a sudden cramp. The excuses were always plausible, but they carried a thin veneer of insincerity, like poorly disguised lies. "Just tired," he'd murmur, his eyes darting away, a familiar gesture that now sent a shiver down my spine. He'd leave conversations abruptly, a sudden preoccupation with a dust mote or an urgent need to check the mail, leaving me with an unfinished sentence and a growing sense of unease. These were not dramatic ruptures, but tiny fissures, hairline fractures in the smooth facade of our shared life, each one a silent warning I desperately tried to ignore. The relentless pressure to achieve, to constantly be more, weighs heavily on this society. It's a gilded cage where worth is measured by external validation, promotions, possessions, the curated perfection of online personas. This manufactured reality breeds a dizzying cycle of chasing the next fleeting trend, a superficial chase for novelty that leaves no room for genuine depth or lasting connection. Consequently, what is often lauded as freedom, the freedom to change partners, to discard relationships as easily as yesterday's news, feels more like a profound emptiness. It's a culture where commitment is seen as a burden, an emotional entanglement, or relic of a bygone era. In this whirlwind of fleeting pleasures and performance, I find myself adrift. The constant hum of superficiality is exhausting. Conversations often feel like a series of carefully constructed sound bites, devoid of the vulnerability that truly binds people. I long for a quiet moment of shared understanding, a glance that conveys more than 1,000 carefully chosen words, but such moments are rare. It's as if I'm speaking a different language, one of earnestness and connection, while everyone else is fluent in the tongue of instant gratification and detached amusement. This disconnect leaves me feeling like an anomaly, an observer peering into a vibrant, yet ultimately hollow, spectacle. The hedonistic pursuit, while superficially appealing, leaves me with a gnawing sense of isolation, an ache for something more substantial than the ephemeral glow of immediate satisfaction. The discovery wasn't a sudden thunderclap, but a slow, creeping shadow that darkened the edges of my perception. It began with subtle dissonances, like a melody played slightly off-key, that I'd initially dismissed as my own overthinking. Then came the irrefutable evidence, a stark and brutal truth that slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. The initial shock was a complete disconnect, a void where understanding should have been. My mind, a well-ordered circuit board, suddenly found itself overloaded, sparks of disbelief flying erratically. The very foundation of trust one had built was crumbling, and I felt a sickening lurch, as if the ground beneath me had vanished. Incredulity was a tenacious static, buzzing in my ears, refusing to accept the data. How could the person I thought I knew so well, the one whose every gesture and word I'd interpreted through a lens of shared history, be capable of such deception? It felt like looking at a distorted reflection, a grotesque caricature of the reality I had so confidently inhabited. This was not just a minor misstep, it was a seismic shift, a betrayal that reconfigured the landscape of my emotional world. A potent, almost volcanic anger began to simmer beneath the surface, a contained inferno threatening to erupt. It wasn't a fiery, outward explosion, but a deep, burning ember that threatened to consume me from within, fueled by the sheer audacity of the deceit. The feeling of being utterly humiliated was a cold wash, seeping into every pore. It wasn't just the act itself, but the profound sense of being played, of being blind to a reality that was seemingly so obvious to everyone else. I felt exposed, a fool whose genuine emotions had been manipulated for sport. Yet, within that humiliation, a steely resolve began to forge itself. The shame would not define me. Instead, it would become the fuel for a mission to dismantle the carefully constructed facade. I would not let the charade continue, this distortion of truth to stand unchallenged. The electrical current of betrayal, now coursing through me, was dangerous and volatile, capable of destroying as much as it illuminated, but I was determined to channel its immense power, to expose the circuits of deceit and bring the hidden wiring into the stark light of day. The initial phase is meticulous data acquisition. Every discarded piece of information, every casual remark, every digital footprint becomes a potential clue. I sift through the detritus of their lives, analyzing patterns, inconsistencies, and anomalies. It's a process of reduction, of stripping away the artifice to reveal the raw, unvarnished reality. My objective is to build a comprehensive dossier, a mosaic of truths, however small, that will eventually form an irrefutable picture. Then comes the covert intelligence gathering. I become a ghost, observing without being seen, listening without being heard. Discreet inquiries, subtle probing, and patient surveillance are my tools. I exploit the inherent human tendency towards complacency, the belief that their machinations are invisible. This requires a detachment, an ability to suppress emotional responses and focus solely on the objective, the procurement of verifiable facts. Each observation is catalogued, cross-referenced, and assessed for its potential to unlock further avenues of investigation. The strategic manipulation of discovered facts is where the true artistry lies. Once a sufficient foundation of evidence is laid, I begin to subtly introduce it into their carefully constructed narrative. It's not about outright accusation, but about planting seeds of doubt, about highlighting contradictions they cannot easily dismiss. I exploit their own psychological vulnerabilities, their pride, their fear of exposure. The goal is to create a domino effect, where the exposure of one falsehood inevitably leads to the unraveling of others. My transformation into a detective is a logical evolution, driven by an unyielding pursuit of justice. I leverage my analytical capabilities, my capacity for logical deduction, and my understanding of human behavior. The intricate web of lies they have woven is complex, but not impenetrable. Each thread of deceit, once identified, can be traced back to its origin, revealing the architect of the deception. My determination is absolute, the truth, no matter how deeply buried, will surface. This is not a quest for vengeance, but a calculated operation to restore balance, to ensure that actions have consequences, and that the architects of deception are held accountable for their carefully crafted illusions. Observing the architect of such elaborate deception, a peculiar blend of intellectual superiority and an unsettling self-awareness washes over me. Their motivations, I perceive, stem from a profound insecurity, a desperate need to control narratives and manipulate perceptions to shore up a crumbling self-image. Perhaps they crave recognition, or fear genuine connection, opting instead for the illusion of power derived from clandestine dealings and carefully orchestrated betrayals. Their intelligence, while sharp, is ultimately a tool wielded for self-preservation rather than genuine growth or contribution. They build their castles on sand, meticulously crafting each grain to appear solid, yet the tide of reality is an inevitable force they cannot truly command. Yet, even as I dissect their strategies with a dispassionate eye, a faint echo of their vulnerability resonates within me. The very act of prolonged vigilance, of navigating a landscape riddled with untruths, breeds its own form of isolation. This constant state of hyper-awareness, this perpetual scanning for deception, can be a lonely endeavor. It's a solitude born not of choice, but of necessity, a protective shell against the corrosive nature of deceit. This awareness of my own susceptibility to such isolation, even amidst my perceived intellectual advantage, serves as a constant reminder of the delicate balance required to maintain one's own integrity. The traitors, in their desperate pursuit of self-validation, often overlook the inherent fragility that underpins their grand designs. They mistake cunning for wisdom and control for genuine strength. Their actions are often born of a deep-seated fear of exposure, of being seen for who they truly are beyond the masks they so carefully construct. This fear drives them to ever more elaborate schemes, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of deceit and anxiety that ultimately erodes their own foundation. I see the cracks forming, the inevitable crumbling of their carefully constructed world, and while there's a grim satisfaction in witnessing this, there's also a somber understanding of the internal turmoil that must accompany such a path. The air in the grand hall crackled with a tension so thick it was almost palpable. They stood before me, their faces a mask of forced composure, the very foundation of their power beginning to tremble beneath them. My carefully orchestrated unraveling had reached its apex. The seeds of doubt I'd sown, the whispers of betrayal I'd amplified, had blossomed into full-blown paranoia. Their trust in each other, once a formidable fortress, was now a shattered ruin. I saw it in the darting eyes, the subtle shifts of weight, the hesitant breaths. They were trapped in the labyrinth of their own making, and I held the only map. The first crack in their facade appeared when the ledger, subtly altered to reveal their clandestine dealings, was presented not as an accusation, but as a desperate plea for understanding from a supposed confidant. Their outrage was genuine, but misdirected. They turned on each other, convinced of individual treachery, their shared guilt dissolving in a storm of accusations. I watched, a cold, calculating calm settling over me. Each pointed finger, each vehement denial, was a testament to my strategy. They were so consumed by their internal war that they failed to see the architect of their downfall standing in plain sight. Then came the bombshell, not a loud explosion, but a quiet, devastating whisper. The information I released wasn't about their crimes, but about their deepest, most personal vulnerabilities, details only someone intimately familiar with their lives could possess. The shockwaves were immediate. The carefully guarded secrets, the intimate betrayals that had festered in the dark, were brought into the harsh light of day. Tears welled, accusations turned to raw pain, and the illusion of unity shattered completely. In that moment, I felt an almost intoxicating sense of control, the symphony of their destruction playing out exactly as I'd envisioned. Yet, beneath the triumph, a heavy weight settled in my chest. This wasn't just about justice, it was about the ruin of lives, the obliteration of futures. The price of this vengeance was steep, measured in shattered trust and irreparable damage. I had orchestrated this downfall, but witnessing the raw agony, the utter despair, was a chilling reminder of the human cost. The satisfaction was undeniable, but it was laced with a profound, and perhaps unsettling, sense of melancholy. The fallout was an avalanche, burying everyone in its path. My family, once a bastion of unwavering support, now fractured under the weight of suspicion and disappointment. My parents, their faces etched with a weariness I'd never seen, struggled to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the architect of such widespread disruption. My siblings, caught in the crossfire, bore the brunt of whispered gossip and averted gazes, their own lives now tainted by association. The ripple effect extended outwards, touching friends who found themselves forced to choose sides, their loyalty tested and, in some cases, irrevocably broken. Laughter in shared spaces became a rarity, replaced by an uneasy quietude. Even within the professional sphere, the consequences were stark. Colleagues, who had once collaborated with camaraderie, now treated me with a cautious distance. Some were outright hostile, their anger fueled by the collateral damage to their own careers or reputations. Others simply retreated, the fear of association too great a risk. The carefully constructed edifice of my professional life, built over years of dedication, now stood precarious, its foundations undermined by the storm I had unleashed. Every interaction was fraught with tension, every exchange underscored by the unspoken knowledge of what had transpired. A gnawing guilt began to consume me. I saw the pain in the eyes of those who had been innocent bystanders, their lives irrevocably altered by my actions. The meticulous planning, the calculated moves, all aimed at achieving a semblance of justice, now felt like a cruel irony when I witnessed the devastation. The responsibility for this chaos, this widespread suffering, weighed heavily on my conscience. Yet, interwoven with this remorse was a defiant thread of conviction. The injustices that had been perpetrated against me and others demanded a reckoning. My actions, however destructive, were a response to a profound betrayal, a desperate attempt to reclaim what had been stolen. The path of retribution had been agonizing, but in its wake, I believed, lay a fragile hope for true and lasting fairness. The crucible of recent events has undeniably reshaped me, forging a deeper understanding of the human heart's intricate dance with love, trust, and forgiveness. I've learned that love, in its truest form, is not a passive state but an active choice, a commitment that endures even when tested by the harshest storms. Trust, I now see, is a fragile seedling, painstakingly nurtured, easily trampled, and incredibly difficult to replant once uprooted. My own journey has illuminated how readily it can be shattered by deceit, yet also how its rebuilding, though arduous, is essential for any semblance of genuine connection. Forgiveness, perhaps the most challenging lesson of all, is not about condoning past wrongs, but about liberating oneself from the shackles of resentment. It is an act of profound self-care, a courageous step towards healing, acknowledging that holding on to bitterness only perpetuates the pain. This period of intense upheaval, while fraught with suffering and regret, has paradoxically instilled within me a resilient fortitude I never knew I possessed. The sheer act of navigating through the debris of my own making, of confronting the consequences of my choices and the wounds inflicted by others, has revealed an inner strength that had lain dormant. I am more keenly aware of my capacity to endure, to adapt, and ultimately, to rise above adversity. The scars remain, a testament to the battles fought, but they are no longer symbols of defeat. Instead, they are markers of survival, reminders of the immense power of the human spirit to persevere. This heightened self-awareness, this newfound confidence in my own resilience, is a direct product of the very crisis I once felt would consume me entirely. It is a profound transformation, a redefinition of self born from the ashes of past mistakes and endured hardships. The path ahead is not a clearly marked highway, but rather a winding trail, shrouded in a mist that obscures both the destination and the immediate steps. The echoes of what was lost, the phantom ache of broken trust and fractured affection, still linger. Rebuilding those foundations feels like attempting to stitch together fine silk with rough twine. The effort is immense, the outcome uncertain. There's a part of me that yearns for the familiar warmth of a shared past, a whispered hope that perhaps, with time and profound understanding, some of the bridges burned can be painstakingly, carefully, rebuilt. Yet, even as that tender yearning persists, a quiet resolve has taken root. The storm has passed, leaving in its wake a profound clarity. I understand now that holding on to what once was, or clinging to the desperate hope of recapturing it precisely, might ultimately lead me back into familiar patterns of pain. The strength forged in the crucible of hardship has revealed a different kind of possibility, the possibility of a new beginning, one not defined by what was broken, but by what can be created anew. This present moment is a delicate balance, a quiet hum of both melancholy and anticipation. I acknowledge the weight of what has been, the deep emotional fissures that demand respect and careful navigation. But I also feel the surge of an unyielding spirit, a determination to step forward into the unknown. The future, though ambiguous, is not a void to be feared, but a canvas upon which I am now empowered to paint a life that is more vibrant, more honest, and more deeply my own. The lessons learned are etched into my being, guiding my steps as I embark on this solitary, yet hopeful, journey toward a more authentic existence.